I went home and I just couldn't stop thinking about her.
When you're in country and you're sitting still and idle, that's a bad sign.
She no longer had a heartbeat. She wasn't breathing. That was the first one on the chest. I started compressions first.
Need advocates. We need people that are going to hold companies, government, hold these people accountable.
So we finally made it to the Heroes Debrief. We want to thank you for joining us on this podcast, where we are providing a platform for our veterans and first responders to share their stories and tell their experiences. This podcast is produced by Hero Services, where we recognize and provide resources to veterans, first responders, and licensed healthcare professionals. Be sure to check out the show notes for our upcoming fundraising events and how to get connected with our social media accounts and our website. We want to thank our principal sponsors, BathWorks and Window World of West Michigan. Their dedicated support provided the opportunity for us to launch this podcast as well as hold our fundraising events. I'm your host, Jordan White, founder of Hero Services, a U.S. Navy veteran and current working paramedic. My co-host here is Chrissy Easton, who is coming in with 13 years worth of EMS experience as a paramedic. Team member on the SRT team, as well as an instructor for AHA. We're excited to be sitting down with Anna. She is a paramedic for 10 years. Why don't we start by telling us a little bit about yourself? Where'd you grow up from?
All right. Well, hi, I'm Anna. So I grew up here in Grand Rapids where I work. Born and raised all my life. I guess I've kind of always had a foot in the healthcare field. As when I was younger, I was a lifeguard always growing up, and then I started teaching lifeguarding, first aid, CPR for the Red Cross, and that kind of eventually led me into what I'm doing now.
So was there anything while you were growing up that kind of like led you into being a paramedic?
So anything in particular, I guess it kind of happened later in life. Like I said, great summer job. I worked for one of our pools in the area, and I loved it. I loved running the in-services. I loved, teaching the classes. But when I was in college, I was continuing working as a lifeguard and an instructor, and actually one of our area hospitals at the time, they had a crash. Their helicopter crashed into their building, and so they had to pull a ton of their patients over into our facility on the pool deck. And I remember just running around in the craziness and just loving it. So I was actually getting ready to go to university for psych, and then happened to be out one night at a friend of a friend's going away party, met someone who was a paramedic, and we got to talking, and it was over from there.
So how did you get started getting into the EMS field? Like, what was that schooling like?
So first thing after I met that person, I did a ride along. The next day I signed up for EMT school. So to be able to become a paramedic, you first have to get your EMT basic license, which was only about, I think it's 4 months. I think you can do 2 months or 4 months accelerated class. So I got my EMT license. I then, I kind of wanted to see what it would look like, because I knew I wanted to continue on to paramedic. Some people will stop and work as a basic. Some people just continue straight through. I kind of wanted to see what it would look like on the other end of things. So with my EMT basic, instead of, working on the road, I ended up working in the hospital, in the ER through that, and then continued on through my paramedic course, which was about, I want to say 20 months. And that includes, you've got to do so many hours in the ER, in the OR, intubating, delivering babies in OB. I think you have to do about 250 hours of ride-alongs throughout the course. And then at the end, you have to do a 250-hour kind of like externship before you can actually take all your testing and get licensed. So it was a process, but
How long was that process for?
from start to finish, 2.5 years. 2.5 years. Does that sound right? Yeah, I think it was about 2.5 years, start to finish.
Hi, thanks. Okay, so 2.5 years does sound about accurate. And then you had mentioned, just for everybody who's listening, you said you can work as a basic. Not everybody goes on. So can you explain that
Yeah.
schooling process a little bit more? Because I think the public is not, they think EMT is an EMT is an EMT.
We're all ambulance drivers. Right?
I know. We're not ambulance drivers any longer.
We are, but we do more.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So EMT and paramedic are two different licensures. So the EMT would be EMT basic. It's kind of your first quick inline. You can do compressions. You can, stop bleeding. You can do that.
Administer oxygen.
There's a few basic medications you can give, and that's you can either do the accelerated and do a 2-month course for it or the 4-month course. So you can get through it pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. To then get your paramedic license is when you can start using, the cardiac monitor. You can start using electricity. You can intubate people, put breathing tubes down. You can administer a bunch of medications.
Drugs.
Yeah, do all the crazy stuff. So
why did you want to be a medic instead of an EMT?
I kind of figured out that I loved the field and ran with it. I full sprint ran. I did not stop. I didn't look back. I started my EMT, and I think when I signed up for my EMT, I automatically just signed up for my medic course as well. So if I'm going to do something, I do it big. So
awesome.
Ran right through.
Let's talk about a little bit of the comparisons between the emergency room and the field.
Yes.
Coming from hospital-based healthcare and first response healthcare.
Vastly different. They're two different worlds. And I'm lucky to have experience in both. I think they both have their pros and their cons. Everyone is suited to something personally, but for me, I like the road just because there's a little bit more autonomy. Whereas in the hospital, it's great. You've got pharmacy, you've got respiratory, you've got security, you've got, your docs, your nurses, your techs. You've kind of got somebody in every corner of their own specialty coming together and working together, where as on the road, we're kind of all just doing our best with what we've got. And you are that person that you're respiratory, you're security, you're the nurse, you're, pharm. So I think that they're hard to compare, but when they work well together, it's a beautiful thing. I know there's been a couple calls Chrissy and I have talked about in the past, where it comes together and it's really nice.
How well do nurses and paramedics get along?
Depends on the nurse, depends on the paramedic, and depends on the patient. Mm-hmm. So patients can make that difficult too.
I think that from my experience, the stronger the personalities are, hopefully they get along, because that can...
It'll be a problem.
Be a problem, yeah.
And let's get real, we all have pretty strong personalities in this field.
Right. I believe that you kind of have to be, because at least I know out in the road, we are, I think, a huge difference between the ER staff and the field staff, as in paramedics, law enforcement, fire departments, is everybody in the hospital is in their nice, controlled environment.
Yes.
And that is what sets us apart.
Right. We're the Lone Rangers.
We are.
They're a team. We are kind of out there.
We're a team. We're on teams, but we're very small teams.
Yes.
And then those little small teams got to work together into one big team, and it can be a lot of coordinated effort. But back to the personality thing with nurses and medics, man, if you can find that gel, it can be something incredible.
And I remember always some of my favorite nurses, they were paramedics in the past. That can be a big, when you're tired of running into people's homes with, who knows what, who knows who there. And it's nice to kind of move into that more controlled environment. Those are some of my favorite nurses, are the ones that can see our perspective and aren't upset oh, you didn't get a list of meds. Well, we found them on the sidewalk. They have not been talking at all, so I did my best. And I think the people who have seen both sides of it tend to be your biggest advocates.
Yeah. And a lot of the medics, I know that, for instance, and I know you are personally one of these that can hold their own in an ER. And I think obviously having some experience there to begin with might have given you an edge in that sense.
Yeah. And I also started in a really small, for like 3 months when I first got my medic license, I worked down south for a little bit, and we had to call in a radio report for every single patient, whether it was no matter what kind of priority, if it was, somebody death and dying or somebody with a stubbed toe. I had to get really good at giving professional radio reports to the entire ER for every transport. So that kind of helped me hone that skill, I think, in a way to like capture attention, stick to like what's important, and like leave out the rest.
Could you explain that a little further? Like you said, I think sometimes people bypass how we communicate with emergency department.
And that's one of, I think, as starting out in this field, I think that can be one of like the most overwhelming things is like giving that turnover report. So like, we've got our patient, we've done the treatment, we've transported. Well, now you have to go and talk to a person and explain what you found, their history, what you've done, what was notable, and you somehow have to package that into this neat little like perfect box that most things don't fit in.
Yeah.
So I think that that's definitely something that can be really overwhelming at first. And at first it was intimidating because in more cities like we're all in Grand Rapids, we give radio reports for like the big calls, somebody is dying of a gunshot wound, somebody has gone into cardiac arrest, like all those big, crazy things where you don't really have the time to think. I think being in a scenario where I had the time to think, I had that, I've had a stomach ache for 3 days and I could take the time to like think through my radio report in a less stressful setting, really helped me out in the long run.
Okay.
So
you had mentioned that was something that you did all the time in that area.
Yeah.
So commonplace now is giving reports for the bigger calls, giving over the radio reports for the bigger call, the more critical patients. And then how about the not so critical?
The not so critical patients, we've got some really cool, most people use their cell phones now where like we've got this app where you can send a message to the hospital like, hey, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I have, a priority 3 of whatever age, and like a quick 1 sentence. You can shoot that off and they'll be waiting for you and ready. And then by the time you get to the hospital, you'll give them a more face-to-face, like elaborate story. But it's so easy to just grab your phone, shoot it off like, okay, on my way. And that's it. You don't even have to think about it anymore. Like there's all these drop down fill out boxes. So
nice.
You don't even have to like come up with your own thoughts.
And you had said a priority 3. Now the
public, yes.
Number?
So I've heard other areas do it backwards from the way we do it, but how we do it is a priority 1 would be your potential loss of life or limb. So like those really high acuity calls. Priority 2, somebody who is sick or ill and also like they're not actively dying right now, but they have a great potential to potentially turn serious. And then your priority 3s are your more, I've had a sinus infection for a week and need to get antibiotics, more of your lower acuity calls.
I think with those turnover reports and stuff like that, I think that kind of affects the relationship between EMS and hospital staff, just because when we were doing the turnover reports over the radio all the time,
every call,
it was just like a consistent like FaceTime. People started recognizing who you were, recognizing your voice. As it's been stated, I have a pretty recognizable voice.
A little bit.
So like you can even be on the radio and then some nurse would be like, oh, Jordan's coming in, this is what he got, and that sort of thing. But like since we've like went to more into like the app and the tech side of things, it's like it's almost that the relationship between EMS and hospital is degrading that much further.
I agree. I think that's very true, especially like, us who have been in for a longer time, we gave radio reports for everything. And like you have relationships with these people, they know you. I'm lucky enough to be in a system where I'm known and I have the reputation that if I could call a doc and hey, it's Anna, do what you got to do. They'll have more faith and know that I'm going to do it if I'm calling to ask for orders for something, they'll be more willing because they know that I'm responsible and professional and do my due diligence. But yeah, now, I mean, somebody could have no idea who you are and just not have the faith that you're doing what you're supposed to. It definitely breaks that down a lot in a lot of aspects.
So coming out of school, how prepared were you? How prepared did you feel coming out to the field?
You think that you're prepared and you're like, oh my gosh, I passed the test. I know everything. And then you know nothing. We always tell students that class will teach you how to pass the test, how to get your license, and how to get your state boards taken care of. But then you learn how to be an actual paramedic on the road, in the truck, on calls. You can't. There's no way to prepare you for, somebody screaming, running up to you, or throwing a baby at you, or, punching you in the face because they're high on drugs or think that you're there to kill them. Like, there's just no possible way to ever prepare anyone for that.
So when you did get out into the field, like, talk about some things that you may have been prepared for and like some things that you definitely weren't.
Yeah. So definitely, a lot of new medics, they love the trauma, the blood, the gore. Now as an older medic, I love the medicals. I love the science of it. Are they acidic? Are they, all of those things.
The thinkers.
Yes, the thinkers. And I remember feeling like, oh, I've got this. Like, I know all of like what lab value should be. And like, I felt very prepared for that. And then coming from the background of I was going to go into psychology, I like talking to people. I'm good at that aspect of it. I felt very prepared for that. And then, it's so funny when it happens because it'll come out of nowhere. You think like you've got this called down. I had a gentleman who had been drinking and using certain substances, and initially he booked it through the woods. Police were able to catch him, put him in handcuffs, call us around, and they decided, oh, I think he's calmed down enough. And I was like, oh, okay. Like a little unsettling, but sure, that's fine. And we were chatting in the back on the way there. It was kind of like a court-ordered situation. So there wasn't really all that much like medical wrong with him. So at this point, I'm thinking, oh, just talk to this guy on the way to the hospital. No problem. About halfway to the hospital on the way, we were on the highway. And my partner had called back to me like, hey, did you send that quick little message to the hospital so they know that we're coming? And this guy just lost it. What did you say to me? Thought he was.
Was the rapport between you two established before that? And was everything calm?
Yep.
Like, can you give us more details as to why do you think that it sounded like it took quite the 180?
Turn. Yeah. So, we had chatted like the moment I got to his side and, I came up to him as I was going to be the attending paramedic. I would be the one in the back with him and, hey, my name's Anna. And he's like, okay, we're chatting about his life, about his family. And we were having like totally normal for someone who's heavily intoxicated and high, but still regularly, like relatively normal conversation.
I think a lot of people can relate. That's hard to follow someone like that sometimes.
It is.
So to keep that kind of back and forth there and calm, good.
It was good.
Good job.
I thought we were doing good. Thought we were fine. And I don't know if it was just like he didn't totally recognize anymore. Like we had gotten into our own little world that I still had a partner in the front of the truck. So when this guy out of nowhere yells, hey, did you send that M-Track? He just flipped. I mean, he was saying some really heinous things to my partner. And I was just like, you know what? Okay. He kind of took it too far, started yelling, saying some really inappropriate things. And I said, you know what? We need to be done now. Like, thought I'd use my mom voice and tamp it down and we'd be good.
And let me just remind everybody at this point, this is, we are, I think she's about 70 miles an hour down the highway at the moment.
Yep.
Right. So to get in the mind of a medic, we're in a box.
A metal
with these
box.
people. Yep. And
no
our
backup.
partners are driving and those are the players.
Yeah.
That's the situation. So when somebody has a personality flip,
It's on us.
yes, and interesting things can happen, I believe.
Yes. Yes, they did. So all of a sudden, I think one of the weirdest parts for me, normally when we deal with intoxicated people, or, as medics, we're kind of these nameless, faceless people. We are a uniform that shows up and helps or does what you're supposed to. So this guy turns around and he said, "You know what, Anna?" And I remember that being like the weirdest moment. I'm like, he remembered my name. Like, that was really unsettling and weird. Like, all of a sudden he was hyper focused on me, and I was like, oh no. And within probably about 3 seconds, with one hand, he had taken the seatbelts off and then just uppercutted me right off the bench. I've still got a scar. He knocked me off the bench. And just like the whole world just like flipped for a minute. I was like, we were totally having a normal conversation. We were fine. Now I'm knocked out on the floor of the ambulance. But I will give my partner credit. Within about probably 8 seconds, he had that truck pulled over on the side of the highway, was in the back with me helping out.
Good.
So it's so important to have a partner that you can rely on, that you can trust, that has your back, because most of the time it's just the two of you, and you may have somebody back there who's trying to kill you, and that's your backup. So
just for the listeners that can't see who you are, you're not exactly a big person.
No, I am not. I like to think I'm scrappy, but no, I'm about 5'4". Not very much of me. My attitude is probably the biggest thing about me. But that's all I got.
You're not overly intimidating looking either.
Nope. I would agree with that.
So, in a good way, absolutely. So, talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
As far as like this individual that was in the back with you, what kind of size of individual was he?
So this call in particular, he was probably, it's been a minute. It's so funny because you'll have these really unassuming people, and then all of a sudden they have this super strength that comes out of nowhere, or they're really scrappy. And I think for him, like, being on a lot of drugs gave him that little extra kick of power. But he was, he was a guy. He was probably maybe just shy of 6 foot, long arms, long reach, much longer than mine. So, yeah, and that leads me into another one where I had a guy who was 6'3", over 300 pounds, and there was nothing I could do.
Well, we'll get into that one here in a minute, but I'm just going to interrupt you because we wanted to take a moment to wind up discussing our upcoming Strikes for Stripes event. We, on September 9th, we will be having our premier event at Cornerstone University. We have a veteran versus first responder softball game, which actually Chrissy here is going to be on the first responder side. We're raising funds for the Hero Services Relief Fund and the Hero Services Wellness Program. We're going to be at Cornerstone University. First pitch will be at 7:15, which the pregame ceremony, which includes the All Veterans Group Parachute Team, will be happening at 7. You can wind up finding more information in the show notes and be able to get your pre-order tickets on the event webpage.
let's go back to that for just a
Yeah.
moment, because I find this subject so important for the public to kind of understand the situations that we have to put ourselves into, and also the difference between I'm 5'2".
Mm-hmm.
I am 5'2". Every man that I'm ever going to be with is going to be at least my height and only taller,
Yeah.
much, much taller. And having that kind of difference in physical size.
The inherent ability to overpower you.
Correct.
Yeah.
Fundamental difference between the sexes.
Yeah.
So in that moment, how did, you said your partner was right there for
Yeah.
you. So let's play this out. So he lands sounds like a nice uppercut.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
Okay.
he does.
And you said it knocked you back.
Yeah. So I was, it all happened so fast. I'm pretty sure I was out for like a second or two, but knocks me out. I'm like on the floor next to the stretcher. And then I feel the truck just like skirt over to the side, slam on the brakes, get in the back. And yeah, my partner tried really hard to like use a pressure point to kind of get him to lay back on the stretcher, get control of the situation. And this guy wasn't having it. He, I think, just with everything in his system, was fighting through everything we were throwing at him. And thank goodness we had a police officer like behind us who was kind of seeing all this happen through the windows.
Were they, I'm assuming they were from the scene.
Yes. Yep. So
is
they
that commonplace
decided
that they follow, or is that your discretion?
It's your discretion. It's the officer's discretion. Ultimately, I think if there are certain like rules we have about putting people in protective custody, that they're required to have police officers right along, but that I wouldn't say that's commonplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think it used to be a lot more common than it is, at least in my experience nowadays. But I mean, there's not a doubt in my mind that if I asked an officer, hey, I need backup, would you mind following me in? There's not a doubt in my mind they would get on board and follow us in.
Good.
So,
So how did the situation end up resolving?
All three of us on top of him trying our best with final success to restrain him to the stretcher. So, I mean, it took all three of us and a lot of effort.
Was there any bruising after?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes.
yeah?
Yes.
Oh,
so
so he's a good one.
something about my face too. I could, like now, red, sweating. That's just who I am. Always red and sweating, especially if I have any movement whatsoever. It gets worse. So we've all been in the back, wrestling this guy, trying to get him under control. And we get to the hospital, and the officer looks at me for the first time, and she goes, "Oh my God, how many times did he punch you in the face?" And I remember just looking at her like, just once. It's just my face. Like, leave me alone.
Anna looks like a little cherub.
Always. I always have the red cheeks.
So how did that affect the rest of your day? And furthermore, did it play any sort of a part going forward in your normal day-to-day medic behavior? Shift to shift.
Yeah, I think it made me, that was one of the first times people will spit on us. They'll call us names. They'll hit us, all that. That's pretty commonplace. But I think that was the first time someone really connected and actually injured me. It just made me more aware. I think I was early in my career, and I bounced back from that one pretty quickly. I had a great partner who had my back, and I didn't have to worry too much. And I think that goes to show how important it is, who your partner is. That's your backup. That's everything. And I was really lucky that he had my back as well as he did. I think later on in my career, I learned how lucky I was and how important that was, as I then ran into another experience where, a lot larger person and did not have the same backup, where for the first time, I thought, okay, I could lose my life here. This could be it. And I think those situations definitely make you hyper aware. They make you kind of look for, I think that's kind of the antithesis of PTSD, right? It kind of makes you look for that threat everywhere. Yeah.
So that second call we haven't really got into
Right.
very much. Let's just kind of lay that out if you're
Yeah.
willing to.
Yeah.
What was that call?
Absolutely. So got called downtown, and I quote, "I was drinking. It was fun, but it's not fun anymore," was the main complaint.
Oh, I'm sorry. You were definitely not drinking. It was this patient's complaint.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. No, I was not drinking. This was the stated complaint from the patient. Anyways,
These are the kind of things we deal with, people.
And that's what's so funny about this job. And people think about, like adrenaline junkies, like our cortisol is all over the place because you can go from this call to like, hey, we're delivering babies in 5 minutes or over
Cortisol
here.
is a stress hormone.
Yes, it is very much so. But no, this guy, and initially, he and I also had a fine rapport, kind of just chit chatting, totally fine, and we got into the truck, and all of a sudden something just flipped, and he was no longer having it. I can't remember exactly what was said or what the turning point was, but he just got very angry, and we were about to take a blood pressure, which we have to do for every patient that we see. And he decided, nope, you're not doing that. Don't touch me. So I tried to, my 5'4" self tried okay, if I talk stern, sometimes it will at least snap people into like, oh, okay, like don't do that. She's serious. She's not joking. And not that I can't go further than that, but that's my tactic.
Go-to.
That's my go-to, that's what I have. And I had a student that day as well, and it was the student's first ride along ever, first day. It was.
Oh, poor honey.
I know.
Did you have the same partner?
No, I had a very different partner. So I was able. He then, after I was like, okay, stern voice, we're not doing that. Let's, this is our job. Let us do our job. That's when it flipped, and he was getting up off a stretcher, calling me every name in the book. And this is the gentleman that was like 6'3", over 300 pounds. Like I could mom voice him to death, and that won't do any good. So at this point now, later in my career, I'm the senior on the truck. I'm the oldest one, and it's my responsibility to make sure everyone else is safe, just like my partner back in the day did for me. And I got my partner and the student out, and in that time the guy had time to get to me, and I was more focused on getting them out. So he actually had both hands around my throat, choking me out, and I just queued up the mic so that they could hear him screaming. And that one did affect me more than the first one. I think probably because of the immediate backup I had. I didn't have time with the first situation to really have that moment of, okay, I'm in trouble. What's going to happen? Whereas with this call, I had lots of moments to sit there and think, like, what am I going to do? There's nothing I can do. I can't get him off me. I can't, and just had to sit there and feel it for a minute. So
he's too big. He's too strong.
Yeah.
He got the jump on you.
Yep, absolutely.
And it sounds like you were able to help your partner and the rider out. How did you go about doing that?
I pushed them.
Okay. Because were all three of you in the back
all
of the
three
ambulance?
of us were in the back of the ambulance.
Okay.
Yep. So I kind of scooped one.
Not moving.
Right.
You were stationary.
We were
at the moment.
stationary.
Okay.
Nobody was driving. So I scooped one behind me. So I was kind of like the physical barrier between the patient and my partner. And then the basic, I kind of shoot out the back of the truck, the student, I shoot out the back. And after a little bit of him fully having control over the situation, I was able to kick his walker out the side door. And that was, all of his belongings. Also, he had this moment of hesitation of reaching for his walker, being upset that I had kicked it onto the ground. And that's when he let go and started going after the walker, and I was able to get away. We all circled back around and locked ourselves in the truck until PD could get there. So
how long did that take?
About 9 minutes.
9 minutes.
Which is a long time when you're living second by second in a high stress scenario. It took a while. It was a frustrating situation on many different levels. That one, that I took some time off after that one. That was the first time in my career, and that's not even a year ago. that I thought, okay, I might die today. This might be it for me.
So about 8-9 years in,
Mm-hmm.
after you have a very established career
Yeah.
in EMS thus far. And from personal experience, I can attest to just how wonderful and committed of a medic you are. And then now is this rattle.
Yeah.
You got rattled.
Oh, I absolutely did.
Okay. I know many situations in the past. I have, when I've been shocked,
Yeah.
when I've gotten somebody got the jump on me, or something came that I was like, I know I have this reflection of guilt and astonishment and just I'm beating myself up inside, but I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
Was there any of that for you, or
Absolutely.
was it different? Was it?
I mean, I think we all feel a little bit had if somebody gets the jump on us, right? Because we're the ones that are supposed to be in control of the situation. We're the ones like, this is my truck, this is my home, this is my domain. Like, we should be in control at every moment, and you just really can't be sometimes. And I think that was hard to accept, because I had been able to live under that thought process for years, for a long time. I mean, I had made that the case, and it wasn't the case anymore. And I was really shaken that, like, okay, bad things can happen out here. You know, like, you have crazy calls, you have crazy days, you have crazy shifts, but you kind of hope. I mean, you hope. You don't always know, but, you know, at the end of it, you'll go home and it'll be a crazy story. And I mean, I think it just, that day became really real, that these are more than just like crazy stories. These are, I mean, this could potentially be life and death. I mean, every time we have a call on the highway, I mean, one of us could get hit. I mean, it made all of that, like every different scenario, really real to me.
So I'm trying to figure out how to word it correctly. How would you be more prepared? Like, now that you've had that experience, like, what could be done? Not necessarily from yourself, but just from a system-wide perspective. Like, what are some steps that could be done for us, or for paramedics and EMTs, to wind up having that safety
Right.
that everyone should have?
Yeah.
However, we wound up finding ourselves in situations that are not safe.
Right.
Pretty much. So I'm just like, everybody has their thoughts on, like, you know, what kind of things should be available or whatever, or maybe that's just kind of the way it is.
You know what? And I think a lot of people would say that's part of the job. And I don't like that response. I think that I think one thing on the back end of it that could be beneficial would be like harsher punishment for people assaulting us or treating us certain ways or physically harming us. I think that a lot of times can be overlooked because it's part of the job. You're used to it. They were drunk, they were whatever. I think that taking that more seriously on the back end would be more helpful. And then I just think, like, you know, at one point we had these like buttons, emergency buttons we could press that would kind of like alert people, the police, your supervisors, that you're in a scenario that you might need help. We don't have those anymore. Like, that's not to say that I couldn't get on the radio and say, you know, hey,
where are those buttons? Because we're very mobile.
right,
Like, we are in and out of the truck. It is a truck.
right,
And we have all these things on our uniform.
yep,
But the point is, I mean, we are never in the same spot.
no,
We're continuously moving. So these panic buttons, so to speak. So where was that, or in relation to?
so they're on our.
And you said earlier you had queued up a mic. Like, how far away were you from
So
those resources?
we have our portable mics, right, for our radios that we can clip onto our belts. The panic button used to be on those, and they're still there. They just don't do anything now. Like, you could press it and it's just pressing a button. That goes to nowhere. But I was in, so we've got a truck radio in the front of the truck. So like when we're driving around, we can, answer dispatch, respond to calls. There's one that's mounted in the back of the truck as well. It looks just like a phone handle that just like clips onto the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the radio I had to get to when I was in the back. And queued up trying to get help was that phone radio in the back because I couldn't reach my portable that was on my belt. So I think it's so hard to make this like one size fits all solution to the different scenarios that we can face just because they're all so different. They can all happen in such different places. They can all happen in such different ways that, it's hard to find a solution that fits everything.
Yes. And as far as I know, I've said this before to you and many people, but there's only so much preparation you can do for a job like this because in many cases, I mean, there's many, many, many calls where I've walked away saying, there's no way that I could have made that up.
Right.
Like my mind could not have created that situation. It was so far-fetched because the reality can be so much different and sometimes, unfortunately, so much worse than what we can imagine. So, there is some inherent risk in this job.
Absolutely.
But to have things like panic buttons and within arm's reach is good. So.
And I know a lot of people will bring up like, oh, weapons, like EMS should have weapons. Personally, I don't want to give somebody who is tweaking extra, ammunition or anything within arm's reach. So I don't think that's the solution, but also we could maybe talk about, like more lenient protocols as far as like, if you do have somebody that's combative, like anytime you've got someone that's attacking you, you have free reign to give them this medication to calm them down, which again, we can call and get that stuff. It's just, you don't have time to call.
Oh,
all
right.
the time.
Not in that. Sounds like sounds like we were behind that.
Yeah.
Behind the
We're
resource
that.
gathering
Yes.
time frame.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow. So how did that affect you in your relationship going forward? Especially with your partner, were you with different partners at this time?
Yeah. So at this point, I did not have a regular partner. So I was kind of just with whoever was free that day, whoever didn't have a partner. And that I definitely had to take a step back. And when I took probably about 2 weeks off just to kind of process what had happened and to let it be okay that I needed time to process. I know that can be a big thing in our field too, is like, you're fine, pretend you're fine. Otherwise you're weak and, but not the case. It's okay to process. But when I came back, I was very particular about who I worked with.
I bet you were.
I wanted to make sure I was working with people that like, I wouldn't have to, ask or tell or, somebody who like the first time would just jump right in the back, go all hands on deck without even thinking. So,
So you said that was like 8 or 9 years in.
Yeah.
So had there been other scenarios before that? Maybe not face-to-face violence.
Oh, absolutely.
But was there anything before that time frame, that 8 or 9, that kind of put you in some funny mental situations? Anything that you could get into?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got all of those ones, like absolutely things have happened. It's been 10 years of absolute madness and they kind of all blend together. And you've got the violent ones, you've got the ones that like make you fear for your own safety, your partner's safety, all of that. And then you've got the ones where they just kind of stick with you for different reasons. Like, how can people do this to each other? I think that's always been like, when people, always, they love asking us, what's the craziest call you've had? That can be a pretty brutal question to ask somebody in our field because that's not always a great answer. You think that you're looking for this like crazy, there was this cool car accident and, there was all that. That's not the answer. The answer is I ran a 3-year-old who was raped by a 17-year-old. And I remember that being the first time I was a couple years in. I was probably 3 or 4 years in. And that being the first time I was like, oh no, this is sticking with me. This is going to mess me up a little bit. And I always thought like, I'll be fine. None of this bothers me. It's cool. And that definitely stuck with me and changed me. So different calls for all sorts of different reasons. And you never know what it's going to be or when it's going to be.
Okay. So you said a 3-year-old. Was this a 3-year-old girl?
Yes.
And a 17-year-old male?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And as far as that call goes, there was a language barrier, so we didn't really know what we were walking into. But they had a feeling it was something off because being one of the only females on the road that day, I took the call. We were not the closest unit, but they had us respond to it just because something felt weird, some sort of sexual assault, harassment situation where a female might be helpful. So we responded, and I remember walking in and kind of just looking around. There's probably, there was a mom, probably 4 kids, and the teen on the stairs, and everyone, I couldn't quite figure out what was going on. And I leaned down, and my patient, her brother, who was 5, was one of the few that spoke English. And I leaned down and I talked to him. I said, hey, buddy, can you tell me what's going on? And he told me pretty blatantly that, pointed to the kid on the stairs, 17-year-old on the stairs, he hurt her, and pointed to his 3-year-old sister. And as soon as it all clicked and I realized, like, everything else kind of just fell away. And thank goodness the police walked in right as, like, my brain was kind of, like, processing and putting everything together. And I just, like, scooped her up in a blanket and took her outside. And I'm like, you need to deal with him. Like,
so were you guys the first on scene?
Yes.
Okay. So who had called? Do you know any details?
So how I think maybe it happened, I think the girl, so she had been upstairs with the 17-year-old and he harmed her, and then she came downstairs crying. And I think that maybe her mom had some idea of what was going on, and she maybe ran out into the street and started yelling for somebody to call 911. Because I remember vaguely it being like a passerby called saying somebody was saying something about assault or something. So I think that might have been the scenario.
Okay. So you and your partner show up and you kind of gather the information, and then you kind of have this realization of what was going on.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure that had never crossed your mind before.
No, absolutely not.
Certainly one of those situations where the reality is worse than the imagination.
Far worse. Absolutely.
So then the police walk in?
Yep. And they put him in handcuffs. Ultimately, the resolution to that story is he was convicted. And I remember going home and feeling like I don't know what to do with this feeling. Like, I couldn't stop thinking about her. But I was like, but you know what? Like, she's alive. She's okay, I guess. Like, I've ran people that die. I've ran people who like watched their family members die. Like, why is this sticking with me? And I think ultimately the conclusion I came to was just the hardest calls for me personally. Again, it's different for everyone, but are just like the terrible things that we can do to each other as people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what sticks with me the most.
That's a hard pill to swallow in this job.
Yeah.
Is I know when I got in, it was I wanted to help, and I could.
Mm-hmm.
So send me.
Yep. Absolutely.
Because I have the mindset to actually make a difference. Mm-hmm. But then these are the calls.
Yeah.
That you don't see coming.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that can really blindside you. So you said after you figured this out, you said you scooped her up and you took her out of the house.
I just wanted to protect her. Yeah. I just grabbed a blanket, wrapped her up, and brought her out to my truck just to get her away from, the 17-year-old, the situation, the home, everything.
And how was she? How was the little girl?
She was crying. Again, language barrier. She was pretty tearful, and she was just 3. I think she was just trying to figure out what in the world was happening, who the stranger is that just like grabbed her and took her outside. And, I brought her mom with us too and everything, but she just kept like saying up. He went up. And that's all she would say. And it was just heartbreaking.
Okay. So play that out through the rest of the shift. And then maybe the weeks prior, or excuse me, the weeks
after. So I knew that call was going to be reviewed and was going to be used in court because I knew that they were going to go after the 17-year-old and prosecute him. And so I think we might have, again, this is years, we might have ran another call and then asked to come back to our headquarters so we could sit down and like write the call up well and have, a supervisor look over it, make sure I didn't miss anything, make sure I didn't need to change anything.
Right, because we do have this thing in EMS and law enforcement and the fire department. We have to write reports on every patient that we see.
Yep.
Because if we don't document it,
Yep.
then details and sometimes the whole scene can be like it never happened. So
Exactly.
we've got to document these things right
and
away.
it has to be non-emotional, non-personal, factual, but you also have to paint this picture, which can be a hard, like, middle ground to live in. And I remember asking my supervisor, like, I knew what I had seen on her underwear. I knew that I had seen semen on her underwear. And I remember saying, like, how do I document that? Like, what do I write that as? Because he's like, well, we can't say it is because we don't know. It's not like you tested it. But how do you write it in a way that it's obvious what it is? It's factual without being assumptive and without, it was a tough one to write, that one. So
Was that when the reality of it kind of hit you?
absolutely. Trying to write it in like this human experience into this little like couple paragraph box that definitely kind of makes you look at it differently. Makes you have to think through it like slower because in the time you can run through it, right? You're just overwhelmed. You're just making your next step, making your next move, making sure the patient's okay. But it's the aftermath when you have time to like sit and actually think about it and then have to document it. And then that night going home, I remember sitting on the couch just processing and thinking through and like always feeling like we're such doers in this field, right? Like we're always like, we got to be doing something. What's the next thing? What am I moving on to now? Done that. And I remember just sitting there like, okay, what do I do with this now? Somebody please tell me, like, what's next? Okay, I need to do something with it. I can't just sit here with it, and there's just nothing you can do with it. And that was an interesting process to go through. I know my husband, who's also been a medic for as long as I have as well, we've always had really different ways of processing. We're kind of opposites, and it's funny, in our personal lives, I'm the more sensitive one, but at work, he's the more sensitive one. Like the work calls bother him more, always have, than they bother me. I've always kind of breezed through them. And I remember like him getting home later that night and just being like, what do you do with this? Like, I haven't been here before. What do I do? I don't know what to do with this, like emotion or feeling or thoughts.
So, with your husband being a part of EMS,
Yeah.
like, I mean, obviously that's a pretty significant safety net for you in the mindset of having somebody be able to talk to and, kind of decompress. And you also mentioned something earlier about heading back to the station to have your supervisors review the report, right? So a couple questions is like, while you were on scene, what kind of leadership was there, if any? And then also just generally speaking, whether it's from like making sure that you're doing okay or making sure that, all the documentation is correct, what was kind of the leadership after the call and resources that were available to you? I know there's a lot of questions in there, but.
Yeah. At the time of the call, obviously we didn't all know what we were walking into or what was going on, and police were right behind us as we walked in. I do believe that a supervisor arrived on scene before we left to check in, if I'm remembering correctly. And then afterwards, when I was writing the report at, headquarters, went back to the station to sit and write. I do remember, there were two supervisors there at the time who were both helping me write it and go over it. And one of them afterwards pulled me aside and was like, hey, do you want to take the rest of the day? Like, do you want to maybe go home with this one? And gave me the phone number to call. We've got like this crisis helpline that you can call, I think, 3 times. It's basically like an over-the-phone therapist. So we do have resources. I think that can be a tough, especially for us in this field with the stuff that we have with the, preconceived ideas of who we are and how we process. I think that can be a really tough thing to like have a phone conversation with someone you've never met, never seen, and like, oh, you can talk to them 3 times and that's it. I think that we should have a little bit more access to some of those, more mental health or preventative care or stuff like that. I've been met with multiple different calls over the years. I've been met with different responses as far as follow-up care or checking in and support. I had another child-involved trauma call where a couple of us had asked, can we all sit down and talk about it? We can do a debrief where they pull in people, they send someone from the state to kind of pull in everyone that was involved in a call, and you all talk about it, go over it together, kind of like we're doing here, but in a professional capacity. And they kind of gave us a hard time about that. Like, you really need one for this call. And so I've been met in different ways with different calls. With that call, I will say I was met with compassion and some understanding. So
you said that you could call a therapist.
Yeah.
Right? Call a therapist and talk to a therapist over the phone about this, which is the idea of that, I think, is a good one.
Absolutely.
What kind of strikes me is going back to that when you said about when people ask you about your worst call, people are like, oh my gosh, what's the worst call?
Yeah.
Because they want to know.
Yeah.
But then that is an incredibly loaded question.
Absolutely.
For us, because I know what's going through my mind, and tell me if you think this is different, is, oh, you don't really want to know.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yep.
you don't want to know.
Yep.
Because then either you're not going to believe me or you're going to look at me like I'm a monster.
Yep.
Because you're not going to believe the words that come out of my mouth.
Absolutely.
Because I couldn't have made that up. So as far as a therapist goes, was that the right fit for you? Do you think you could have done that? Were you having it be over the phone? Because there's a certain amount of trust that we need to build in order to deliver these, these horrific stories to a person.
Yeah. I, especially at the time, don't get me wrong, huge therapy. Yay.
Me too.
Everyone should
Yep.
see a therapist. We're all got something deep, dark inside of us that we need to talk to someone about, but not what I'm here for. I think that I wasn't comfortable with that for exactly that reason. Like, I'm over the phone with someone I can't see. I can't really gauge their reaction because so much of what we say and response to our calls, response to our experiences can be pretty aggressive and brutal to other people. So to not be able to gauge that reaction and exactly like you said, to not have that trust with this person, like, I, thank goodness at the time, was already seeing a therapist. So I had someone that I knew and I trusted and could talk to. And
good.
So
you had
that,
a pre-established relationship.
I had a pre-established relationship that was super helpful. So I've never, and maybe it makes more sense for other people, but I've always kind of had that question mark in my head about that. Like, here's this phone number you can call. Like, I would
Who am I
not
talking to on the other end?
I don't know who that is. I don't know them. I don't trust them. They don't know me. And then what? Like, I'm supposed to get all my feelings out in an hour phone call and then be good with it? Like,
Yeah.
I guess that just never made sense to me. Maybe it's super helpful to some people that maybe wouldn't be comfortable going in and talking to someone, but
I think it's a good start.
it's better than nothing.
It's better
I
than
will
nothing,
say
which
that.
unfortunately EMS has
Oh, yeah.
has not had enough attention, but now we're starting to gain some, but this is
Yeah.
partly the reason we're kind of here.
I've had a supervisor say to me, I hate that, the field now, people like feel like you have to feel things and deal with it. That's not how we used to do it.
That's somebody that has been in the industry for a little too long.
And also why our suicide rates have been so high, why our depression, divorce, it's unbelievable. Like, that's not an okay answer.
Well, yes, hopefully we are making a difference in that sense.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
So with the therapist, that's such an obvious answer.
Yeah.
Should be.
Yeah.
But let's talk about like why it's not such an obvious answer for first responders, and I would say that coming from the veteran community as well.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like there's a select few of individuals that are in the therapy world that would be appropriate for us to talk to and like confide in, stuff like that. So a couple of questions is like, first off, outside of therapy, who do you rely on most? And then in the therapy, like talk about a little bit why it's so, I guess, confrontational for us to confide in them.
Yeah. I have been really lucky that my husband is in the field. I think I'm blown away by people who have spouses that aren't by their spouse, like they're able to listen to that and support, and that's amazing. But I'm so thankful that my husband kind of absolutely understands, the calls to life. I can, whether it's good or bad, right? Oh, I got to, decompress or pace someone today. That's exciting. And you don't have to go into all the detail explaining it. And so I have super lucked out with that as my live-in support system, my husband. And then I think that this field creates bonds like nothing else. I mean, my best friends are people I've met in the field. Chrissy's one of them. We've known each other for a long time, but I think you tend to bond with those people because you can have those conversations, because you can like say those things without freaking people out. Or I know one of my friend's younger sisters like gets worried about me. She's like, is there something wrong with you? Like I was excited to call AeroMed. And she was like, well, did the girl die? And I'm like, well, yeah, that's not the important part. Like people think we're weird and crazy. And like, we have to be this way a little bit to be able to move through this job and do what we can to help people. But it's always, it's such a fine line between like, this was crazy cool and this was like crazy detrimental to my mental health.
Yes. Or I think we touched on this, not here, but what we thought would be the reaction.
Yeah.
Versus
what it is.
What really is the reaction.
Absolutely.
Seeing these kind of horrific, especially like big car accidents where there's lots of sensual stimulation, meaning senses, meaning you see, you hear, you smell, and there's all this overload of information. And I remember coming back from a couple of those calls going, I thought I would feel different than I do right now. Absolutely. And to reconcile that, that develops as we go.
Oh, absolutely. This is back when I was in medic school, I was working at the hospital in the ER, and I had my first cardiac arrest, and she passed. And I remember going home and being like wildly upset because I wasn't upset. I was like, I feel like there's something wrong with me. I should be upset by this. This should bother me. This should live with me. And it didn't. And some of them do, some of them don't. And I just learned that that's okay. Acknowledge the ones that stick with you. Let the other ones go. Like that's what makes us capable of doing this job. That's why we are the ones that should be doing this job, because we can move through that sometimes seamlessly, and that's okay. And, I always have to remind people, like, this is not your emergency. When I'm showing up on scene, like, I'm going to do everything I can for you and your family, but it's not my emergency. So I have to keep my head on a swivel and stay professional and not let the emotion take it over. But then tying that back into, the therapy and, like, who can you talk about this with? I mean, I don't think that there's a huge, so many therapists have, like, these specialties, right? Either substance abuse or sexual assault or trauma, whatever it may be. But like, we are such a large subsect of the population who needs therapy, whether it be military, police, fire, EMS, all of us. Like, that's such a large group of people that I think need to be approached in such a specific way, just because we have such like strong long-standing stigmas attached to who we are and how we think and how we should react and how we should be.
And just the sheer volume of things that we see per shift. I mean, because shifts vary greatly.
24 hours, you can...
In time, in effect, but there's so much to unravel there. Like you were saying, your husband is an EMS. My husband is an EMS as well. My husband is also law enforcement. And he grew up medic in a very different mental space than when I did, because we're starting to talk about these things. We're starting to rely on therapy.
Yeah.
We're starting to really rely on each other more.
We're starting to see that it's okay to rely on each other in therapy.
And that it's probably the best course of action.
Yeah.
But like when he was beginning, that was not pushed.
No.
So we've had some battles in our marriage, although we've seen the same things, and he's a wonderful support system. It's also hard for him to open those things up too.
Yeah.
Because of how many, the differences. But wow.
So you've had a lot going on there with the calls that you've talked about and stuff like that. But what is like a normal day? So those are some pretty, I would say,
intense days.
Yeah, those are pretty intense days. But like, just for the people that might not really understand what EMS is all about and stuff like that, just kind of not really getting into specific with calls, but just what's a more normal day? Normal speed.
Yeah, normal speed. And it's so funny. Normal is so relative, right? I mean, it depends on your system. It depends on the day. But you get in, you bitch about somebody putting your truck up wrong. You get out to post. I would say on average, since COVID, we've definitely been busier, at least in my opinion, in my experience, it has been. But I'd say we probably run like in a 12-hour shift, on average, probably like 8 to 9 calls. Obviously, some days are busier, some days are slower, but that would probably be an average day, where like 80% of them are people who have had back pain for 12 years. And, so it's not like it's all of this crazy, exciting running down the highway, delivering babies. I mean, we've got a lot of like community health assistance. Yesterday, I think I was in 3 different homes and explaining people like how you contact your PCP, how you like set up follow-up appointments, how to follow through meds. Like it's a lot of kind of just like explaining medicine to people, I think, in a way that they understand. But sorry, I'm kind of going off, but I think on most days we show up, we do our job, and we go home. And I think that the crazy days are further and few in between, but the weirdest part is you just never know when they're going to hit. You never know when that day will pop up.
There's no plan to it.
No plan.
Like, so you said that 12-hour days, right?
Yes.
I work 24s, so there's some variables there, but so when do you take your lunch break?
That's cute. Lunch, what's that? Yeah, okay. So being in a less rural, working the 12s, so we don't get any type of breaks. We run something called system status. So if we have these like predetermined spots. So central point will be, this intersection, and if you're the only truck available in this moment in time, you will go sit central point. You have to sit within a half a mile of that intersection, so whether that's a gas station, a parking lot, some dead-end alley, the park where you're hiding from people, whatever it may be. Then say somebody else clears from the hospital. Now we have 2 trucks available. One sits on the north side, one sits on the south side. So we're kind of always moving and morphing to have good coverage around the city for wherever the next call may drop. So like there are some days, even if I'm not busy with calls, I'm driving in circles just to no end. So yeah, no lunch breaks. Some days, even if I bring a lunch, I don't get a chance to eat, which I always bring a lunch because I do not ever put money on being able to stop and get something to eat. The last 3 times I even attempted that, I paid for it and then got a priority 1. So you have to walk out, leave your food. It's so sad. But yeah, no, I mean, I know there have even been points where I've asked hey, I need a minute after this call for whatever reason. It was crazy. I needed 10 minutes, and they're like, nope, sorry, you got to get back out.
Good luck finding a bathroom at those times.
I see it every hospital.
Yeah,
every single one. People think I have problems, but you're gonna get a crazy 5-car accident on the highway that's going to take 5 hours and you're going to have to pee the whole time. Good luck.
Yeah.
Those simple things that people take for granted in either office settings or just day-to-day life.
Yes, having a bathroom
Having
next to
a
your
bathroom.
office.
What if you run out of water?
Being able to go to the bathroom whenever you want.
It's crazy.
That is not part of the EMS day-to-day.
No. And fire, from what I understand, good luck even just like opening the grill, because then you're going to get a call. Like, no doubt the second you try to make food. So
For the record, she's talking about the fire department, and they are fortunate and they have stations.
They do. I'm so jealous. Well, and a lot of, like other outside ambulance companies, I know, like 24 hours, you guys have stations, right?
Yes. So a 12-hour day, but you don't have a station. So where do you spend your day?
Parking lots, in the truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of a lead-in. I'm going to take a moment to talk. I'm 6'3".
Yeah.
So you're 5'4".
Yes, I am.
You can fit
put
in a
my
cab of a.
feet on the dash.
I can't. I turn into a human pretzel. So for me, I do work 24-hour shifts. It's I would say it is a little bit more rural. We do have some stations that are busier than others, and there's been days where I've spent an entirety of a 24-hour shift in the truck.
Yeah.
So we're taking calls from the hospital, hitting another call, 20-minute response time, what have you. And for me to wind up spending all day in the truck, that's a big issue. And I'm sure it's a big issue for you as well. But I mean, not everybody in EMS are little people.
No.
So trying to get comfortable. And the other thing is a bunch of people don't realize is that the cab of the truck is like a truck, like a normal truck.
A literal truck.
With a wall behind the seats, so you can't recline
like you're
the
in an
seat.
airplane seat. Like,
Yes.
That's what it feels like. You're in an airplane seat that's always somehow too small and too upright that you can't move.
Mhm.
And now you have to, write your reports in there too when you're on your way to the next call, quick finishing up. So now you've got a laptop in your lap, your head's down. I recently found out I have 2 herniated discs in my neck. About 6 months ago, found this out. The more people I have talked to, like at least 3 people a day that I run into in EMS are like, oh my gosh, me too. Just because of how we're sitting, how we're moving. Like, people, especially large people, are not built to live in the front of a truck for 12, 24 hours.
I've had many a partner. I mean, I'm 5'2". I can fit in a van nicely, but still, even 5'2" is tough. It's not comfortable, but I've had many a partner who have been over 6 foot who have dreaded being in the cabs of these smaller vehicles and even the bigger ones. I mean, some vary. Some can recline a little bit, but for the most part, they're your description, which is it's upright, and we've got to figure this out now. Times that by moving heavy people in funky situations and
starting IVs in a bathroom on the opposite arm that's up against the wall. Like, it's just,
we had a fall one time and this guy was on his tummy. I had to lay down on the grass, lift his arm up and start an IV that way. And I was all wet from the grass. We can't predict it. Yeah. Our bodies really do take a beating.
They do. And that's something like I was off because I couldn't move for a couple months. I'm still in the process of figuring out what this disc herniation means for me. But going back, it's like, I can't, people are like, well, try not to lift. Try not to bend over this way or try not. That's not an option. If I get a call and somebody is trapped or stuck or you just move. You don't think about it. You just go. And then in between, you're just fine, trying to find the least uncomfortable position to sit in and the best way to put your laptop on the dash with the screen tilted toward. It's just, there's no comfortable way to go about it.
Have you put any thought into how we could be helped in that situation? Is there any ideas about how we could better take care of our bodies through our shift?
I have a lot of personal feelings on this, which I won't go too deep into. I'm all about preventative care, right? I think chiropractors, massage therapy, functional therapy, that should be a part of all of our vocabulary. If we're going to be like running our bodies this hard, we need to be taking care of them just as hard. Because, I mean, the expiration date on us is unreal. I mean, I think when I hit year 4 or 5, they were like, oh, you've already made it far and past the average burnout time. So all of us who are sitting here, I think I'm the youngest medic here.
Mm-hmm.
We're all like the oddballs for having this much time in and still being upright.
4 or 5 years in a urban EMS setting, you're a vet.
Yeah.
You're a vet.
Yeah.
You've already put the time in, and you've earned it, so to speak.
Yeah.
In a job that you cannot fake it.
Nope.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, anything else that you would like to say to any messages that you have for people?
I think one of the biggest things I probably think about day to day is that people forget that we're people. You know, at the end of the day, like, I'll have so many people will show up to a call that we were called to. Somebody called us for whatever reason. I didn't come looking for you. And people, you know, like, we get treated pretty harshly sometimes, like we're these robots who just show up. And again, we're uniforms. We're nameless, faceless people. I totally appreciate that. I am not in it. None of us are. Otherwise, we would be out of it in a week. None of us are here for the accolades or anything like that. But I think just remembering, like, we're people. Treat us like people. You don't have to be overly nice. I get you're having probably one of the worst days of your lives, but I think the overall acceptance of the abuse that we take has been pretty hard to swallow, especially over the last years with all the worsening tensions between, you know, PD, everything. I think that people just forget that we're people and we're just out here doing our best and trying to make a difference in whatever way we can.
Mm-hmm.
And then just to touch back on again, like, be careful the questions that you ask any military, EMS, first responder, like, your craziest call. That's a really nonchalant way to ask someone about potentially one of the darkest days of their lives. So I think just to be understanding with us, we can be a little difficult at times, but for good reason.
For good reason. I feel like it is a privilege to be able to do what we do.
Absolutely.
In order for people to trust us enough to invite them in, or invite us in to their homes and their situations. And I had a man, an older gentleman, he was dying, like passing away in the back of the ambulance. And I remember I stopped everything and I just said, it's okay. It's okay. You can go. You can go. And I got him to the hospital and they did what they could. And I didn't get any follow-up. I don't know how long he lasted after that, but I remember talking to my parents, and my parents, I was telling them, my mom's like, how's your day? How's it going? She's very worried about my emotional state. Right. I'm like, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I had this call that kind of stuck with me. And my mom was like, oh gosh, how did you feel? And I said, privileged.
Absolutely.
And my dad was like, yes.
Yep.
Because it is. It's a privilege to be able to do what we do for people.
People invite us into their homes and trust us with their family members' lives, with their own well-being, with their children's well-being. And just to be able to literally just knock, knock, not wait for an answer and walk into someone's house and to ever be met with anything except for, like, who the heck are you, it's an honor. Absolutely, to be a part of that. And, you know, we can't save everyone. People make jokes that we just prolong lives. We don't save them. But I think sometimes the way we go about it is just as important as what we do. And being able to, like, walk those families through it can be huge. And it is an honor. You're exactly right.
So with your 10 years worth of experience in the field, being an old salt, what's a couple of things you want to tell to the up and coming medics, the newer EMTs, the people that are considering getting into the field?
Definitely do some ride-alongs first. Figure it out first. This is a weird place to live. It's great, but it's weird. It's not for everyone. I think one of my biggest things that I've at least noticed in, like, the last 5 years with the changes, appreciate what we've had to go through to get the field to where it is now. I think a lot of people that are up and coming now that walk into the field with the privileges that we have earned for them kind of walk into it and just take it. And I think it's good to remember where this field started, where it's going, and where we're continuing to go. But to take care of yourself first and foremost. I know there's that saying, you know, one patient is sad, two is dumb. If you do get into this field, like I so much want to start from the beginning in eradicating the stigma that like, oh, you can't have feelings, things can't bother you. Like, just remember that you are the most important patient at all times, because if you're not taken care of, like nobody else will be either. So.
Is there anything else?
I think that's about it.
Well, we really appreciate you coming out today
Absolutely.
and having a conversation with us. And I think that's starting to pull back the curtain, so to speak, for some people that aren't so familiar with EMS and the culture. And,
yeah,
you know,
I appreciate you guys having me out here and giving this platform to people to, you know, show other people what our lives are like and what we do.
Yeah. That's our intention, is we want to try to get the communities to recognize and, you know, if they feel like that they want to support us and have the opportunity to do so. Which also brings me to our principal sponsors. We want to, again, thank Window World and BathWorks. These companies are not only sponsors to the Heroes Debrief, but they're what we call our principal sponsors for the Hero Services organization. They are more of a global support throughout the entirety of the organization, assisting with sponsoring our fundraisers, providing spaces like this, helping us launch the podcast, getting the word out there a little bit. So Window World specifically installs energy efficient doors, windows, and siding for homeowners in the greater Grand Rapids area. And BathWorks is a bathroom remodeling company serving homeowners throughout the greater West Michigan area. So not only are these companies our staunchest supporters for the organization, but they also wound up doing significant other donations to other charitable organizations as well. So if you have any home remodeling needs, be sure to reach out to them. Their contact information will be in the show notes below. And I would say that is a good conclusion to our very first episode of the Heroes Debrief. And we should be punching out episodes on Wednesdays. And we will be lining up our next guest here very soon.